welcome Madeleine Grantham to our little corner of Startup School, where we meet people who are running their own business and we talk to them about how you got started and what you do, and we'll just take it from there. So yeah, what do you do? What do you do?
What do I do? I do storytelling, traditional storytelling, and either as performance or as leading workshops with both adults and children. You know, I've done everything from church groups and retreats to preschoolers, although that's not my favorite area. Yeah, and performances, again, adults and children in schools and clubs and things, adults all over the place, from festivals to weddings and things. Prison, that was one of my best.
That's amazing. I mean, storytelling has had the word storytelling, of course, has now been abducted by the startup world, because we consider storytelling now to be about everything from how you explain how you got started in your business to how you market your business to just about everything. But you really are the original storyteller. So what does it actually involve? When somebody books you, what would they expect to see?
Well, I would have a consultation with them about what they actually want. It's just somebody standing there and putting across a story, whether it's a series of fables and teaching stories, wisdom stories, which tend to be little short things, practically jokes, to part of an epic. I mean, just this last week, me and some fellow storytellers did a chapter each of the big Finnish epic, the Kalevala. So we did a whole epic in an evening. So you would negotiate with your people who are booking you for what they wanted. I mean, mostly it tends to be sort of intermediate length, sort of 20 minutes, sort of 10 to 30 minute stories, which can be like minor myth, excerpts from bigger myths, sort of short episodes, or wonder tales. The things that people talk of as fairy stories are actually defined amongst storytellers as wonder tales. In other words, they've got a bit of magic in them.
Amazing. And how did you get started with all of this?
Well, I was at a festival, and there was a series of workshops over the weekend festival. I only got to 2 of the 4, I think it was, where they just talked about it as a thing, you know. And I'd already discovered that my brain was a brain that worked well with story subjects, because I was a pretty average student. And then one year I came top in some subjects. And I thought, but I'm the really average one in the middle. Why? And people go, oh, you've become top. And I wasn't a great studier, but they were all story subjects. It was RE, English, and history, I think, all subjects that were based around here's a story. And I thought, well, they're easy. So that just made me aware I've got a story brain. So when I found out there was such a thing as storytelling, my interest was piqued, and I didn't really do anything about it after that festival, except I kept meeting the man who'd organized it and asking him how it was going with him. He lived in London, and he was telling me, oh, it's a long story. He's just finding out such a thing existed. And eventually I found out there was a whole subculture, a world of people doing storytelling, and it just sort of blossomed from that, really.
And how do people find out about you? Because it's not, you wouldn't, do you Google storytellers?
Yeah. I mean, there's a Society for Storytelling, so there's a sort of like overarching umbrella organization where they've got basic information about what storytelling is and where there are clubs and what do you look for when you're booking a storyteller, because it's like booking a musician. There's a world of difference between a folk musician and a heavy metal or a rap artist. You know, they're really different. You're not going to book one for, you know, and with storytellers, people have their specialisms, and there's people at different levels of experience. People who have it's a second string to their bow. So there are some people who are teachers who are also storytellers. There are people who are actors who are also storytellers. There are psychologists and therapists who sort of both blend their skills, but also have them as separate parts of their lives as well, but each informs the other. So you need kind of a little bit of an idea of what you want the storytelling for. So there's the Society for Storytelling. Yeah, then people have their websites, and I'm sure they put storytelling as a tag on it, or I've put like children's entertainment as well. You put on whichever tags you think fit what your offer is, as well as the storytelling.
And obviously, most of this, I'm assuming, has gone on face to face up until quite recently, or was there an online component to it previously? Because I'm assuming the pandemic had an impact upon how you delivered your work.
Yes, there's I think before the pandemic there were bits, and I didn't, there were bits and pieces of it, mainly as sort of teasers, you know, to get people hooked, or as features on a person's website, so when people looked for them they had a little taster of what they were like. That was with the people who were sort of like 100% living off their storytelling and as performance storytelling, rather than just jobbing tellers that went around schools or something. I'm generalizing, I didn't look at everybody's websites, but of course with the COVID, the lockdowns and things, particularly those whose main income was storytelling, went online and either did performances where you would pay as you go, or workshops and things, a bit of both. I haven't really done, I've done performing in Zoom situations, so it's not been recorded, but not recorded ones, because it's a bit like in the days of when you put it onto CD. Is yes, it's an extra thing to sell. Yes, it puts your name out there, but also you think, well, can I tell that story anymore? Because if people have heard it, they've heard it. You know? It's a bit of a dilemma. You know? So I think people are doing it more. There's one particular guy who just gone full time and called Jason Buck, and COVID kicks in, so he just had to go online, and he has really forged a path. He just churns out new stuff all the time. It's amazing. So yeah.
I guess it puts a lot of pressure on you, though, as you said, to be constantly creating and constantly inventing if what you're doing is not just received in that kind of one-off way. So.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it must be true for like stand-up comedians and people like that, especially for comedians, because you don't want to keep hearing. I mean, some people like hearing the same joke, but yeah. It's one of those things that we're still juggling with and deciding, I don't know.
Yeah. And how did you initially, when you started, can you think back to how you started, how you decided how much you were going to charge for doing this?
Oh, this is a big thing within the storytelling world, because you don't want to undercharge too much when you start out, because it belittles the skill and trivializes it and makes people think it's just, you know, but you don't want to, if you're just beginning, you can't hardly charge the same as people who are experienced with a massive repertoire and so on and so forth. So you've got to pitch it right. Also, you pitch it according to who's going to book you. It is really difficult to do an off the peg. The Scottish storytelling website has a sort of guide price. Equity have sort of guide prices. And I think you pitch it according to that, or you might have a standard price that for certain people you say, well, I'll adjust that for you because you're people that I want to work with. For example, I mentioned the prison thing. One other thing that captured my attention when I first got into storytelling was hearing about these projects with people in prison, helping them to send stories home to their children. And I just thought that was such a, it was called Storybook Dad or Storybook Dad. And so when I was offered the chance to go and tell us some stories in prison, I thought, oh, great, it's such a need. But it was a charity working within the prison. They didn't have, they couldn't offer a fee. Well, so I sort of simply said, my fee is X, but if you pay my expenses, I'll come and do it, because I'd always wanted to go into a prison and tell stories. So they paid my fees, but what was marvelous is she told the listeners, her fee is this, but she's generously. So again, it was giving the respect for the storytelling and the skills and acknowledging what it was worth. Because that's the other thing is travel distances. At what point, you might say, well, within this radius, 30 miles, that's part of my fee, but beyond that, I have to charge mileage. There's these kinds of things as well.
And I heard you mention equity before, and obviously the society. So aside from you, do you have to be a member of equity to do this, or is it expected, or any of these professional?
No, the equity thing's quite new, because to begin with, they just didn't understand who we were. They didn't have a category with us. And the main attraction to going into equity for a lot of storytellers is the insurance. They've got a very favourable insurance. I mean, for a long time, I had insurance, just separate artistic insurance, because a lot of bookers insist that you've got it, as well as your DBS and everything.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I'd never actually considered with some of these professions that equity would even, like you say, would even understand, care,
yes,
do anything, because they're quiet. So did you have a theater background?
No, I didn't. No, I started out in occupational therapy.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know, it's just because I always liked stories, and I understand the world through stories and metaphor and similes and all that kind of figurative stuff. It helps me understand things, so that's why I was attracted to it. And also I kind of like the folk culture. I like folk music and so on, so yeah.
And as you've gotten older, and I know that you've been doing this for a while now, have you changed at all how you've approached this, or the importance in which you attach to it, or has anything changed in that period of time?
No great, I don't know, I'd have to sit and think about that, but I think generally it's just continuous improvement. You always want to be better and better, to serve the story better. And also, by watching other storytellers, you become not just aware of their skills, but the material, the material that's out there. I mean, it's like a negative and a positive at the same time, in that the UK doesn't really have a living handed down tradition. And there are pockets, the traveller communities probably do. Some of them do, at least in Scotland I know about. I'm sure the others probably do as well. The Celtic communities have handed down traditions. Jewish communities that have come from overseas have these handed down things. But we had the Industrial Revolution, and that separated us from the inherited storytelling tradition. A lot of it's been put into books, so we read them in books and we can tell them from that. And of course, we've got the sort of cultural tradition of biblical stories, Greek myths, Arabian Nights type stuff that we grew up with from childhood. So we've got it there, but it's come out of books. It's not been handed down mother to child, that sort of thing, or father to child, whichever. So that's a sort of dislocation from our roots, in a way, you could argue. But on the other hand, it makes us open to the stories from beyond. Now, within the storytelling world, there's a big debate about that, about cultural appropriation and such like, but it also makes us feel an empathy for these other cultures. So I think there's something about presentation and honouring and looking at that cultural appropriation debate, but it also gives you a kind of kinship with these peoples, because to understand a person, you've got to understand their story, where they come from. So it just, and the debates on the storytelling forums about these philosophical and thought-provoking issues. I mean, because this is what story is about understanding the world. And I'm not really answering your question, am I? I think going back to that, changing as I got older, is you imbibe all these debates and these dialogues. You improve your skills, not just in the material, but also in how you approach the story, both in the performative stuff, voice projection and stuff, but also in unpacking a story, in understanding the heart of a story. Yeah, and sometimes the best storytellers can be the more unshowy ones, because they kind of, they just draw your attention. It's a kind of hypnotism. You've gone into like a shared dream with people. It's a very concentrated thought. You'll have experienced it if anybody's told stories to small children, the kind of focus that you get with people. And I think the ability to get into that improves with practice. This is why in olden times it was an apprenticeship. It wasn't just, here's how you do it, here you can project your voice, here's the plot, learn the story. It's more, you absorb a lot more through all these other things.
So, I'm just like, you just stirred up so much stuff for me now. I'm really kind of, because one of my little side hobbies is I'm a singer, and I'm all about telling the stories behind the songs, because I feel that it brings the songs to life. But until recently, I was singing songs that were mainly sung by women of color in the early part of the 20th century. And it was a challenge for me to think about, can I actually do this? Is it right for me to do these stories? They're not, because they're not my stories from my culture. And now I'm doing a show that's about a Jewish woman who grew up in the 20th century in New York, which is where I'm from. And I have to say, it does feel more comfortable and more authentic for me to do that story. So I completely understand that probably when you started, maybe all this stuff around cultural appropriation maybe wasn't so big a topic that it's now, it's now become. But yeah, that's just a side.
But I still think it's important, because we learn about other people through their stories. So, but maybe it's about giving the introduction or commenting on it, because by singing that it's that old saying, isn't it, to understand a person you walk a mile in their shoes. And by reading novels or listening to stories or songs, you are walking a mile in the shoes of the other person, but you're just recognizing it is other, perhaps.
Yeah, completely. And coming back to business, I mean, one of the things that we teach people in startup school is the importance of storytelling, especially around their own origin stories and how they came to start their businesses. Because often, especially if it doesn't seem to be a particularly interesting business from the outside, when people bring their own perspective to it and their own reason for going into business, it brings that alive for so many people. Do you do any of that kind of work, or is it very much performative work?
I haven't done to date. I know, within the Society of Storytelling and the wider, that there are certainly people who specialize in that. And there's a brilliant book. I've got it on my shelf. So fabulous. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I could look it up. Yes, there's a whole world branch of storytelling where they work with companies to do those kind of things. It's not something I've done myself. No, apart from the church thing in the back. But yes, I think it's being proven that human brains remember stuff in story form. Even those people that learn address books and things, they do it by creating a little story that goes with it. So yes, I can see it's vitally important in that sort of field.
Yeah, great. Well, I've just so enjoyed this discussion, and I've learned about a whole new industry that I never knew existed before, which just goes to show that there's little niches and things out there for everyone, in societies and all sorts of stuff. And I'm sure lots of people are now thinking, how can I become a storyteller? Sounds like such a great job. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure. Always love to talk about storytelling.
Yeah, and how can we get a hold of you? That's of course, my next question. So if we wanted to book you, find out more about what you do, where would we go?
Well, yes, I have a website. So it's Madeleine Grantham, Storyteller. Also, it's got, because I didn't know if there were other people out there with my name, a taste a pinch of salt if that doesn't bring a result. Madeleine Grantham, obviously a bit of a horror to spell, but that's why I put another reason for I put a pinch of salt storytelling, because I thought, oh, people won't know it's got 3 E's in it and all of that. Yes, you can also look on the Society for Storytelling website. They've got a directory, and I'm within the directory there, plus a lot of other storytellers. Yeah, and if you Google, generally you'll see places that I've turned up. Facebook, of course. We also have, I live near the New Forest, so in the New Forest we have a monthly adult storytell club. It's a bit like a folk club, but for storytelling for adults.
Oh, fab. Oh, that's great. Cool. Thank you. That's brilliant.
You're welcome.
Thanks.